in, so they come in later, I noticed, than before we can bring them forward to the speaker. So again, there are 2 questions, or actually 3 questions, which you can pose to Captain Khaled during coffee break. Okay, then we go to the 3rd and last speaker of this session. That's Mr. Stephen Mackin, partner in Clyde & Co. Stephen is a partner in Clyde & Co. Marine and International Trade Department. Stephen specializes in shipping and energy-related issues, particularly those arising from the carriers of oil, gas and LNG by sea, involving charter parties and bills of lading. His areas of particular expertise are oil, gas and LNG tanker-related issues, including disputes arising from oil shortage, cargo contamination, unsafe port or berth disputes, fits nicely by the way, and market loss claims. He works for a wide, entirely international client base of ship owners, charterers, insurance and cargo owners. Stephen has a first-class Bachelor of Science degree in Maritime Studies, and before qualifying as a solicitor, he was a navigating officer with Shell Tankers UK Limited. Stephen has practical experience on the operation of VLCCs, product tankers, LNG carriers, and bulk carriers. Well, that's a nice mix. Yeah. He was Shell Cadet of the Year. Wow. Wow.
So, yeah, yes.
A watchkeeping officer with operational relay and has sailed the Atlantic on a tall ship. He speaks regularly at conferences worldwide on shipping-related issues. Stephen is recommended by Legal 500 and Chambers and Partners for Shipping. He has been described by Chambers as a leader in this field. Well,
thank you. May I start by just saying I never wanted to be a lawyer. When I was at school, I wanted to play centre forward for Manchester City. I grew up in Manchester, so it was compulsory to support Manchester City. I'm hopeless at football, so my next career choice, so that I could travel, was as a seafarer. I used to get seasick, so I came ashore. I didn't know what to do, and to make a sort of an honest-ish man of me, I became a lawyer. I've had 25 years practicing, predominantly doing oil and gas-related charter party and cargo disputes, mainly for ship owners and their P&I clubs, sometimes for charterers. I only get to see things when they go wrong. So my impression of ship-to-ship transfer operations is that they're just a litany of disasters waiting. None of my ever phoned me to say, Stephen, we just want to have a chat, everything's going well, really happy. They only phone me when it's gone bad. Now, I know from my time at Shell, where I got involved to ship transfer operations, we would do transfers in Line Bay of predominantly a cargo called TJP, so crude oil from Venezuela. We would transfer it in Line Bay. Nothing ever went wrong. Maybe a mooring line would break, but there were smooth, well-organized, well-prepared operations involving 2 Shell tankers. That's fine. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about, and it's really appropriate that I'm following on from somebody who's experienced a London arbitration and everything that's involved with it. But from the point of view of a ship owner who has clearly done the appropriate checks, has been very cautious in his approach, and has a demurrage claim, he then ends up in arbitration, and the charterer throws a whole range of different arguments at him as to how unreasonable he has been in order to defend their claim. Now that is what lawyers do. You come to us, and whoever instructs us, we look for arguments to help you. We look for arguments that will improve your position, because you have on the one extreme, I lose and I pay everything. You have on the other extreme, I have some arguments that help me and I don't pay as much. And generally, in my experience, 95% of the cases I'm instructed on settle. And they settle somewhere between the owner or the charterer, whoever's instructing me, getting 100% and getting less than 100%. And the question for the lawyers is how much I can move that scale down in favour of my client. And I produce arguments to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'll talk through some of the issues which I see arising from STS operations. And then we'll look at the charter party. We'll look at the law and the legal issues that crop up as a result of the types of charter party that we enter into, typically for tankers on voyage or time charters. So, when it all goes wrong, I have up there a case, the Asian Progress 2 and the Byzantio. It wasn't one of my cases. It was a case I was asked to look at. But as an example of it going spectacularly wrong, this is a classic. The Byzantio was a very old tanker, single skin. She was described as the next Prestige. She was hounded out of Europe by Greenpeace, ended up in Hong Kong, where she was engaged to do a ship-to-ship operation with the Asian Progress 2. Asian Progress 2, large, new, modern vessel, Scandinavian crew on board. Well organised, well put together, well sorted. No vetting done. No consideration of the quality of the lightering ship, the daughter vessel. The ship comes alongside. The loading operation commences after a brief exchange of information. And the chief officer on the Byzantio, who had very little tanker experience, got panicked because his PV valves, the valves that released the pressure from the tanks, were making a lot of noise. So they were working properly. To solve the problem, he opened the tank hatch lids to allow gas to spill out of his tanks onto deck. He then panicked because the volume in one of the tanks was coming up too quickly, and he opened all of his cargo tanks to make everything common. So instantly the tank oil level drops down to level out across the ship, draws oxygen into the tanks. One of his crew decides to have a cigarette in the forecastle head. There's a huge explosion. A number of people were killed. The Asian Progress 2 was damaged. There was a pollution incident. And the legal consequences afterwards keep lawyers very busy, very happy because they can churn alone and make money from this exercise. But the arguments around it were clearly this was the daughter vessel's fault. The arguments put forward involved criticism of the Asian Progress. She'd discharged cargo too quickly. She had ignored requests to slow down. A host of other things which came out and resulted in the Asian Progress getting only a part of what they were entitled to because the lawyers did their job. What sort of things crop up? Well, I mean, I have it. The worst case is obviously damage. The Asian Progress, the worst case scenario. Most of what I see are cargo claims, cargo shortage claims, cargo water contamination claims, disputes on cargo quality. And that's the bread and butter of the types of disputes you see. Now, they are common to every loading and discharge operation. They're not specific to ship-to-ship transfers, but you tend to see more of them because the ships are moving around, it's more difficult to do the gauging, and it's more difficult to do the whole operation. And you also get reissue of bills of lading and all of the other contractual bits that go with it. Not very exciting, but they regularly land on my desk. Damage during ship-to-ship transfer operations. Do the collision regulations apply? No. Some lawyers try to argue that they do. They don't apply. The ships have been brought together very deliberately, and the collision regulations don't apply. Equally, a long time ago, I did a collision on a brand new vessel, maiden voyage, fully laden, West Africa, and the daughter vessel came on her approach at high speed and missed because she was going too fast, so she overshot. Now, from my perspective as a seafarer, the logical thing to do is to slow down, do a large turn, and come back and have another go. No. The daughter vessel decided to go astern and try to maneuver astern back alongside. A crazy maneuver with her West African pilot on board. They collided. The first argument from the charterer's lawyer was that our vessel was the giveaway vessel and was obliged to keep out of the way. Now that just, it's a nonsensical argument, but they're the type of things that lawyers will do, because the more we throw in, the more chance we have of moving the scale down. So what are owners' obligations in terms of ship-to-ship transfer? Most of the tanker charters I see are either on Shell Voy 6 or BP Voy. Both of them have pretty much the same provisions in them, and both of them provide a right to the charterer to have cargo discharged by ship-to-ship transfer. And they do this by including ship-to-ship discharge or loading within the definition of port. So port is generally defined as being a berth, a position alongside any vessel or lighter, or alongside a terminal. So they have the right to demand a ship-to-ship transfer operation. What are the charterer's obligations with regard to safe port? Now, generally, under dry cargo charter parties, a charterer who nominates a port takes responsibility for the safety of that port. So if something goes wrong, if the ship can't get into the port, or the ship is damaged transiting the port, or something goes wrong in the port, the charterer takes responsibility for it. Tanker charter parties are different. Tanker charter parties reduce the obligation on the charterer to one of exercising due diligence. Now, lawyers love due diligence because it's quite a wide and very flexible concept. It's something which you can argue about, and we love arguing. We like to put our points. Essentially, due diligence is about acting reasonably. What would a reasonable person do? So in the context of seaworthiness, where reasonableness has been defined, where due diligence has been defined, the definition is, would a reasonable ship owner send his ship to sea in this condition had he known what would happen? And there's a case called the Lipaya. She was a Sovcomflot tanker, had a contamination issue on board, and the court looked at the contamination, and the theory put forward by the charterer was that there were small amounts of coating breakdown. So in the tanks, the paint had started to break down. She was 10 years old. And that palm oil had got trapped behind these paint coatings. So when she loaded caustic soda, the palm oil came out. And this was the owner's theory. So the palm oil came out and it contaminated the cargo. And the judge, Mr. Justice Ricks in the Lipaya, said a reasonable ship owner would never suspect that tiny residues of palm oil trapped behind coatings would ever cause this problem. So it would be unreasonable to expect the ship owner to repair the ship, even though he knew that there was some coating breakdown. So it's a test of what is reasonable. How do arbitrations define, and how do arbitrations and courts work out what is reasonable and what is not reasonable? Well, we get experts along to come and talk to it. So as a lawyer, I'll present my evidence, I get my ship's crew to give their evidence, and then I produce an expert who comes along to help the court and to tell them what is reasonable, what happens in the industry today. Experts are supposed to be independent. They're supposed to be people who are expert in their field. They're supposed to be there to help the court. Now, logically, therefore, you would expect a charterer's expert and an owner's expert to arrive at the hearing and be in complete agreement, because they're just there to tell them what the industry does. In 25 years, I have never seen two experts agree about everything. And surprisingly, they always seem to agree with the person who's paying them. Now, I joke about it. I mean, they are independent and they do try hard and they give their evidence honestly. But we choose the experts who are going to best help us. And when it comes to a hearing, the expert presents his evidence, and if the judge believes him, even if you're sat there going, that is mad, that what he's saying is wrong, it's completely just at odds with all common sense, the judge believes him, you will lose. And the risk of going to arbitration, even when you've acted reasonably, where you've done all of this evidence and you present it, if the judge doesn't accept it, or the judge looks at it and goes, that's quite complicated, I don't really understand it, but this expert sounded very plausible, you can lose. And the consequences of losing are you don't get anything, and you pay the legal costs of the other side, and your own legal costs. And the costs of arbitrating something nowadays, a High Court hearing, 5 days in court, $500,000, easily. So a dispute on demurrage for $500,000, a large claim, you can end up with legal costs going one way or the other of $1 million, because lawyers aren't cheap. So what is reasonable? The charterer is obliged to do these tests, not the ship owner. The charterer is obliged to provide a vessel that is safe to do the operation in a location that is safe to do the operation, and they need to have exercised due diligence to do it. The ship owner has the opportunity to step back from it and say, actually, I'm not happy with that. The same as going into any port. The port systems are unsafe. I'm not comfortable doing this. I don't want to do it for these reasons. But, as you heard, he needs to be able to evidence that, and he needs to be able to do it with authority. So, has the other vessel been vetted? Does she have a track history of problems doing ship-to-ship transfer? All of this information comes out. Is the location safe? Are the weather conditions going to be favourable for doing this operation? Does the person in overall charge, the POAC, has he got experience? All of these are questions which a ship owner needs to be asking as well, because if he pulls the plug and says, we're not going ahead with this ship-to-ship transfer operation because that vessel is unsafe or I am uncomfortable with it, he needs ultimately to be able to justify it and evidence it in court. That's where the DYNAMARINE vetting, the DYNAMARINE database and information helps a ship owner, because it gives you something to start with in terms of determining whether or not you are comfortable going ahead with this procedure. I just wanted to contrast that with asbetank voy. So commonly we see asbetank voy used, and quite often with asbetank voy, there is an additional clause included, which is the intertanko ship-to-ship transfer clause. Intertanko is a great additional clause, and as a ship owner's lawyer, I would encourage people to always include it in their charter party whenever they can, because it requires the charterer to give you a blanket indemnity for anything that goes wrong during the ship-to-ship transfer, and is therefore very helpful. I'm very conscious of time, and I just wanted to touch on one issue here, and I'll conclude. What I would say is that I'm sure you'll get copies of the slides. There's also a Clyde & Co. booklet in your bag, which is frequently asked questions on ship-to-ship transfer. I didn't write it, but I have read it, and it's very good. Let me just bring things to a conclusion with just one example of a ship-to-ship transfer operation which went smoothly. It was done using, it was lightering barges, so barges in Rotterdam, 3 barges loading motor gasoline, so MoGas, onto a ship to fill up 2 tanks on a ship, big ship. And the first 2 had gone fine. So the first 2 come alongside, she loads the motor gasoline spirit, the MoGas, into 2 tanks. The 3rd vessel comes along, and it's night time. It's on the edge of the weather conditions. So the weather was poor, it was dark, it was cold, and it was wet. So typical summer weather in Rotterdam. The barge comes alongside. The mooring master and chief officer on the receiving vessel are up high at the manifold. They drop down the vapor return line. Now, the vapor return line has got a yellow band round it saying vapor return. But it's dark, and the barge master always gets the liquid line first. He says, the barge master says, oh, they always give me the liquid line first. So the vapor return line comes down first because that's the one which is most convenient to the ship. The barge master doesn't think anything of it. He connects the vapor return line to his liquid manifold. The ship sends down its liquid line, and it gets connected to the barge vapor return line. So the 2 had misconnected. The ship has on board gas oil in every tank apart from the 2 with MoGas. Everything is set, everything is well organized, and this is this is a charter with an oil major involved on both sides of the equation. Barge master is ready to go, says we're set. Mooring master and chief officer say, okay, start cargo. And the cargo starts coming, but it's coming very slowly into the ship. The ullages are increasing in the tanks where they should be, 3 wings, but not very quickly. So the chief officer says, we're receiving cargo, increase the rate. So the rate increases, and then the high-level alarms start going off in all of the gas oil tanks because the vapor line has been charged with MoGas, and it is leaking into all of the gas oil tanks. The claim for cargo damage is $14 million through an error. The ship owner holds his hand up and says, this is nothing to do with me. I have, the cargo came on the manifold, that's my responsibility. The allegation from the cargo interests is that the ship, my ship, not the barge, is to blame as well. And she's to blame because the person in overall charge of the operation, who was stood on the manifold looking down at a tiny barge, didn't realize the mistake. Now, I think that's a rubbish argument, but I would because I'm acting for the ship owner. But it has an argument. There is an argument there. And that's the type of thing which we see regularly with ship-to-ship transfers. Even when everything has been done carefully, the barges are approved and the ship is approved by vetting, it's being done properly, but it's just a mistake. So that's like one extreme where it's done well, and we have the Asian progress where it's done badly. Now, I'm pleased to say that most of you, as I said at the beginning, never have problems, never phone me up. But equally, because people don't take care on these operations, and because a number of you are quite happy to let things ride, you're going to keep me and all of my fellow lawyers in gainful employment for many years. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for your presentation. And well, in the way how you present it, if I'm allowed to say as chairman, it's nice to listen to. It's in the storytelling way. I like that. We have already 2 questions, and they are actually on the screen there. The first one is, what qualifies an expert in terms of field experience? What should be the efficient background of, in example, cargo contamination or pollution prevention expert?
Okay. Anybody can be an expert, is the starting point. But when you get to a hearing, what happens is you'll get tested on your area of expertise. So you'll get challenged about what you know about the subject. So when you're choosing an expert, you need to be identifying people who really do have expertise. On a cargo contamination claim, I'd be looking for people, master mariners, chief officers, typically, who've sailed on that type of ship, ideally. Now, part of the problem you get is that people like me come ashore after a period of time at sea, and they become lawyers or they become experts, and they go into an expert firm, a firm of consulting people, and they get quite old. They grow up and they see lots of cases. The first, let me digress a little bit. Becoming a lawyer in the UK, you need to get a training contract. And to get a training contract is very, very competitive, especially with, if you want to do shipping law, it's very specialist, and I knew that. I phoned up a law firm. I didn't realize any of this. I was thinking of becoming a lawyer, and I phoned up a law firm and said, please, can I come and visit you just to talk to somebody about becoming a shipping lawyer to find out what it's like. And I turned up, and the partner who I was talking to said, I've just got this tanker claim has landed on my desk, and you worked for Shell. Would you mind having a look at it for me, please? And I looked at it, and he had an expert report there from one of the big consultancies in the UK. And I read it, and I thought it was all about gauging systems on board the ship, and about, we used to use pneumatic gauging systems on some Shell tankers, and they were a disaster. They never worked. And I looked at it, and I said, I don't think your expert has ever seen one of these gauging systems, because his report doesn't match the reality of what it is. And I explained why. And we had a conversation with the expert, and it turned out that he'd read the manual and was just applying what he was a tanker man. He'd been on tankers, but he'd never any experience of that. So identifying what it is that your question is, and then really drilling down in experts' experience is important. The other element to it is quite often the ship owners or your charterers, especially if you're dealing, with Repsol or Shell or BP, they have a massive depth of knowledge in-house, and you need to pull on that and get them to help challenge the experts to make sure that the person you're getting is, in fact, the best person for the job. I had a, sorry.
Yeah. No,
yeah, okay. I had it just in terms of an engineering problem. On a dispute. We decided not to use an expert because I'd interviewed the chief engineer and the second engineer, and they were better qualified. Russian second engineer who'd actually worked for the engine manufacturer as an engineer for them. He had a degree and master's in engineering and perfect English, and he was a better expert than I could have ever wished for as an independent. So be imaginative.
I'd like to comment on this.
I have a question. As we have been talking about ship to ship, do you have any? Do you have? Doesn't work. Now?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any experience you can share of double banking operations at sea, or any items you would like to highlight from a due diligence point of view? Which means obviously 3 ships instead of 2 cargo transfers
yes.
at the same time.
From a practical experience, no. I mean, I never did it with Shell. I mean, I've seen operations where it has been done. It has never resulted in a claim from my point of view, because I think increasingly people take such care about doing these operations that they are so well planned and so well thought through. I've been involved in, one of my clients was involved in one of the first LNG transfers, by ship-to-ship transfer. That was single. But again, when you look at the depth of planning that gets involved in that operation, you're cutting down the risk. And the big point is obviously minimizing risk and the risk of incident. For me, most of the issues I see from ship-to-ship transfer, as I started, are the dull issues. They're things like, do we need to issue a bill of lading for this after the operation? What should we call the cargo? What's the date of transfer? You know, all of the things which cause claims, but the spectacular, it all going horribly wrong, is very, very rare, because people in this industry are cautious and we are careful. And that's the important part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
There is one more question there, and since you seem to love to be in Rotterdam during summertime.
Yeah. I don't. I mean, an accident as in the sense of a major incident, no. An accident as in a massive cargo contamination claim, then yes, and it's currently ongoing. But I think the same. The problem that we will have in the industry is the more that we do ship-to-ship transfer operations, the more routine they become. You get blasé about it. It becomes routine. And I think the key to it is, as an industry, and this is doing myself out of work, obviously, maintaining the standards we do now in the future. And part of the test of reasonableness, so going back to due diligence, it's a concept that moves. So what was reasonable 10 years ago or 20 years ago is no longer considered reasonable now, because things have improved. The expectations have increased, the standard of knowledge has moved on, and what becomes reasonable today in the current market situations and the current knowledge, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, will no longer be tested as reasonable. So we as an industry, and charterers and owners, need to be right at the edge of this, pushing the boundaries of standards on board ships.
Maybe it's a pity it's stating anonymous, and I'm a Rotterdammer. I work for the Port of Rotterdam, and I love the summers there. I would like to know why this question is put forward. And I'm not biased, but of course I would like to know, why is this question put forward? Why is the question there, has there been an accident in Rotterdam? Does the person likes to speak up on this? No. Okay.
Okay.
Then, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Stefan, I agree with you on the experts, though I have never come across on two solicitors agreeing either.
It's true. But we're paid not to agree.
You mentioned the safe port and safe berth, you mentioned Shell Voice 6, but we also have the ASPAD envoy, which says exactly the opposite.
Yes.
Okay, just thought I'd mention it. My question is this: have you ever come across a request that the owners, through the master, provide a letter of indemnity to an STS provider for performing his services that were contracted for and paid for by the charterer? Thank you.
I have seen situations where ship owners have been asked to indemnify the service provider, and owners have come through to me and said, what do we do? And I've always said, refuse to provide the indemnity. There is no reason a ship owner should ever indemnify a service provider where he has no contractual link to them, and it is the charterer's obligation to provide that service provider, and it is the charterer who wants to perform the ship-to-ship transfer. The owner needs to have various targets. Now, his primary target, if something goes wrong, is the charterer, but equally, he should be able to pursue the ship-to-ship service provider, the fendering arrangement, the service provider, if necessary.
I agree, and thank you for the confirmation. And for our colleagues here and guests, if you ever come across and you have to face an accident during STS operation, make sure that the VDR works and you have the tape. On the issue of whether an STS location, this is something that we are going to discuss later, but I think it's appropriate to mention it since you mentioned it earlier. You said that the STS location may well be considered either a safe berth or a safe port, or a port or a berth, whatever value you put to it. In most charter parties, it is stated that the STS location does not count as a port. In other words, if the charterer has an option of discharging 1 or 2 safe ports, the STS location does not count as such. And on that basis, does the legal status differentiate between a port and a location?
No. What I mean, the charter party will often distinguish between you'll be able to discharge 1 or 2 safe ports or berths, and if you do a lightering operation, they don't want it to count as one of those 1 or 2 safe berths, so that within what you've agreed. In terms of the safety of the STS location, that falls within the safe port warranty in the charter party. So for the purpose of determining the safety of the location where the ship-to-ship transfer operation is going to take place, it's defined as being the same as a port. So the obligation on the charterer is to nominate a safe location, and that's usually found within the safe port warranty in the charter party. But in terms of it counting as one of the discharge ports where you've said we'll agree to discharge at 1 or 2 ports, an STS is in addition to that, but the safe port warranty provisions still apply to it. So it has to be somewhere the ship can get to, reach and depart from in safety without suffering damage and without needing exceptional standards of navigation.
Stefan, we have to differentiate between the requirements of a port under the charter party and the requirements of a safe location, an STS location, under the charter party. If the charter party incorporates the IFSTS guidelines, those guidelines define what is safe and what is not safe for an STS location. So the definition of an STS location safety is as per the IFSTS guidelines, if you incorporate them in the charter party in the first place.
Yes.
And it may be, in addition to the charter party, safe requirements of a port or a berth, whether it's due diligence or whether it's an absolute obligation to do so.
Yep.
And that is very well defined in the OSIM, which goes as far as to define the licenses, the weather conditions, the backup equipment that they need to have in case of an oil pollution, etc., etc. So, and the master's right to refuse and abandon, etc. This is a much wider definition for an STS location, other than the strict definition. Here is a location, I exercise due diligence, 10 operations were conducted in the port, so as far as I'm concerned, it's all right. This is not the case.
No, I agree.
Just to differentiate between that, because it's a much stricter requirement on the part of the charterer to provide an STS location which is safe under the OSIM guidelines.
Yes.
in addition to the charter party guide.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
No, I agree.
Okay, thank you very much. Stephen, we have one more question, and then I think we have to close this session. So it's about MEPC 186/59.
I have to hold my hands up and say I have no idea unless I have the regulation in front of me and read it. If whoever's posted it wants to just expand on it.
Okay, well, thank you
Sorry,
very much for your presentation.
We have one at the...
Sorry?
One question.
If it's a quick one, because we are over time.
Yeah, my name is Stefanos Maulas. I'm chemical engineer for Solix Engineering. We're a consulting engineering firm. And pertaining to the cargo contamination, reviewing claims, have you ever come across, you mentioned taking from the palm oil and the caustic soda, cross-contamination. From my experience, I could say that some cargoes could be incompatible also in hazardous ways. Have you come across in such due diligence reports on the incompatibility regarding hazards, not just cargo contamination, but also potential hazards?
Not so much in the oil trades, because it tends to be clean petroleum products, and it's just a question of whether the tanks are cleaned generally well enough to carry the next grade. In the chemical trades, yes, but the inspection regime and operation of chemical tankers generally factors in the information around compatibility, suitability, both from a hazardous perspective and also a contamination perspective, which is important. What we see more often are issues around the container trade. I mean, there was a Maersk ship that reported today with a massive explosion. I don't know the reason for the explosion, but you suspect it's the shipment of dangerous goods which have not been declared. Now, that, in the sense of a chemical compatibility issue, we've seen sodium hypochlorite cargoes stowed next to bunker tanks because nobody knew what was going to happen or nobody knew what was in the containers, and you have an explosion. So, yeah, we see that type of thing.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we really stop this session. And a big hand for Steven. So, Aya, Khaled, Steven, thank you very much for your contribution, and I think this was a very interesting session. So please ask the people if you want to know more, because some questions haven't been answered. Thank you very much.